Hey, I'm Jay Yelas. Today I'd like to share with you my top 5 ways to fish a Yamamoto Senko. The Senko, as everybody pretty much knows by now, is probably the all-time best-selling soft plastic worm ever in the history of bass fishing, and I don't think there's a bass fisherman across the country that doesn't have some Senkos in his boat. But I just wanted to kind of run through all the many different applications that I use for a Senko. It's a bait I've been fishing since the late 90s, when I remember we were at a tournament at Santee Cooper in South Carolina, and the Senko was still a prototype, but Gary, being a good friend, he came up and gave me a bag of these prototype Senkos, and I was like, I tied it up on a Texas rig. This is the way I originally fished it, and pitched it up near some stumps. And there's some big old massive stumps at Santee Cooper, and just let it kind of settle down to the bottom, and man, we caught them and caught them. That was my introduction to the Senko way back in the late 90s. But since then, people have come up with a whole variety of different ways to fish it. It's such a versatile bait. I think that's why it's been the #1 seller of all time. So when you Texas rig a Senko, it's got some good action as it falls. It has that shimmy and that wiggle. The advantage to Texas rigging it is, you can throw it in the cover, and I always make sure I skin hook a Texas rig bait like that. Just barely stick the tip of the hook back in the worm. But to achieve even greater action in open water situations, I like a wacky rig. Wacky Senko, and I usually fish a wacky Senko on a spinning rod like this Lew's spinning rod. And a wacky rig, of course, you just hook it in the middle. You can fish it exposed, or you can use like a little nylon guard. The advantage to the wacky rig is it has the most action of any presentation with a Senko. It's just, the bait's just all over the place, wiggling as it falls, and this is not just a shallow application either. I know there's some of our spotted bass fisheries, deep clear water, guys will rig a wacky Senko up on 6-pound line or 4-pound line, and they'll throw it out, let it sink 30 feet deep, and you get some of those deeper suspended fish the guys have won tournaments doing that. So the wacky Senko works great like around bridge pilings, skip it under docks, open water, around grass, outside weed lines. I mean, just anywhere a bass lives, you catch them on that. Then there's some other techniques too that I like. The Nico rig is something that's come on in the last few years, last 5-6 years probably, and it's just a wacky rig Senko with a nail in one end of it, kind of like we have here, and you can just usually I put the nail in the tail, or you can put it in the head too, and just screw a nail in there, and it's solid, good to go, and it's heavy. You can cast it, you can fish it deep, fish it on the bottom, but it has that, when you pull it, it has that wacky little scoot to it. That started out in California, but it's really spread all around the country. That's a good for like rocky type lakes. Fish it out, near the bottom, fish it out towards a little deep water. And of course the drop shot rig, everybody knows the drop shot, how solid that is. Usually I'll go to a smaller one like the Slim Senko or the 4-inch Senko on a drop shot. And you can rig a drop shot either Texas style or wacky. A wacky drop shot catches them too. I like drop shotting when I'm looking at fish on my Garmin units and fishing deep vertical presentations. And then finally, a Carolina rig. Another great presentation for a Senko. You got a big, like anywhere from a half to a 1 ounce weight swivel, and then about a 3-foot leader to a Texas rig Senko. And that's a bait that you can fish deep. You fish it on the inside weed line, on a grass lake like Sam Rayburn, fish road beds with it, deep water. So those are my top 5 ways to fish a Yamamoto Senko. In review, it was a Texas rig, a wacky rig, Nico rig, drop shot rig, and finally a Carolina rig. There are other ways to fish it too. You've got a shaky head, a wobble head, top water, you name it. You may be able to come up with some unique way to fish it yourself, but if you do, be sure to tell me. I'd love to try it in my fishing on the FLW tour.